Well, good morning. Welcome to River Community Church. My name's Aaron. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. We're pumped to have you here for one of our services. Now, if you were expecting Pastor Mike to be up here to do a big announcement, don't get upset yet. He's coming up. He'll be up shortly. There's actually going to be a shorter sermon. Has anybody ever complained about that? All right, so a little bit of a shorter sermon, and then we'll have another song of worship, and then Pastor Mike will take some time to address an announcement that affects the entire church. So plan on that at the end of our service. But if you're here, you caught us in the middle of a series we're calling This Is Us. And in this series, what we've been doing is we've been talking about things everybody does as a Christian or an attender here at RCC. So far it's been everybody fits, meaning everyone here is welcome. They should be able to fit into this church. And then this following week, we talked about how everybody invites. So if you're a part of this church, you should have an open invitation to others. And we should be very invitational. So that was week 2. Last week, we talked about how everybody connects, meaning everyone here at RCC should have a chance to connect with others. So we do as much as we can as a church to help you connect with other individuals here. Today is Everybody Worships. So after today's message, I hope that you will see that we all worship something, whether we try to or not. Sometimes it's God, and sometimes it's other things, actually. But my goal is to help us be aware of when we aren't worshiping God first and have ways to help us get back on track of worshiping Him as our priority. Now, like I said, we're in the series we're calling This Is Us, and I'm actually really excited about this series because we've been talking about This Is Us and how it relates to the show This Is Us. Is anybody like a big fan of the show This Is Us? Yeah, or who's seen maybe like an episode, maybe a series, like the whole first series? Anybody? All right, good. So a lot of you out there, great. Well, actually, I'm really excited about this series as a church because I really like the show This Is Us. And I think I'm like the one pastor on staff that actually watches it. But thinking about that a bit, as I was thinking about this message, I really like the show for a lot of reasons, but one of them is what the show models and shows us as people. Because, for example, I really desire a lot of what the characters have in the show. The dad, Jack is his name. He's portrayed as this romantic guy to his wife. He's handy, he's tough, but he's this heartfelt dad that takes care of his family. These are things I'm personally into and want to be. The show also covers things like fostering, adoption, how to get a fancy car and a fancy house, having good kids, being known as a hero, how to be known for something. And these are things I find myself like glued to because I'm either interested in it or I want it personally or I hope for it in the future. Again, for myself personally, I hope for things like a fantastic marriage, amazing kids, good family, good job, good money, purpose, fame. And I really like the show because it models certain things of what I want my life to look like with a family. A lot of times I see and learn from this show thinking, if I could just be more like that, or wow, they got it all figured out. And sometimes I feel like there's just no way I could do what they do or have what they have. A thing that kept coming to mind this week as I was preparing this message and thinking about this show is the scene from Wayne's World where they say like, we're not worthy, you know, kind of like this.
We're not worthy, we're not worthy.
It's a great thing to keep coming to your mind, right? But as this was happening, I started to realize this is a really tough balance for me of thinking about the show This Is Us and talking about the concept of worship. If we look at the definition of worship, worship means to treat someone or something with the reverence and adoration appropriate to a deity. Now, that's a bunch of mumble jumble. If I give you the basic definition, it's to treat something as if it's God. Worship is to treat something as if it's God and giving it everything a God deserves. So seeing that definition, I think sometimes I find myself worshiping the things in the show This Is Us, just as highly as God and if sometimes not more. For example, with the show This Is Us, I find myself prioritizing and giving all my time worshiping being financially stable. I find myself worshiping trying to be a really good husband or an accomplished man or a person that's good with children or a good father or to being known, a hero, or to be famous. Outside of the show, sometimes I worship my athleticism or fitness. I worship my sense of adventure, luxury, pleasure, my own happiness, success. I get sucked into worshiping the idea of getting these things. What about you? What about you? Have you ever found yourself worshiping what the people in the show This Is Us have? For you, maybe it's just an emotional connection with someone. Maybe it's romance. Maybe it's a great marriage. Maybe it's success, luxury, a really great family. Now, these are things that lots of us pursue or desire, and they aren't bad to want or to have. But when we want them more than being God-honoring, or it gets more adoration than God, we start to worship it. So I want to ask you again, are you doing that with something? Are you doing that? I know at times I am. And if this is something we struggle with, if this is us as a church, something we struggle with, this is something God wants us to change and tells us to watch out for. It actually goes against God's first commandment for his people. It's in Exodus 23, and it says, "You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods." So have you been there before? Have you idolized something so bad that you were willing to go after it even if it was against God's wishes, his timing, or by putting him lower on the priority list? Again, for you, maybe you want luxury that it makes you not give as God commands, or makes you even steal. Maybe you want acceptance, or you want acceptance so bad that you're willing to backstab other people or judge them just so you get the approval of that one person you really want. Maybe you want success so bad that you cheat. Maybe you want to be a really good husband or wife that you're willing to put them before your values as a Christian. Or same thing with your kids. Maybe you worship the approval of someone that you're willing to put their desires before your own or before anything else in your life. Maybe you feel you just can't go on without one more drink, hit, or substance of whatever it may be. I feel like we all have this inner wrestling match with things we desire and our worship of God. And as we mature in our faith, I feel like we come to these crossroads where we need to decide to not to worship certain things anymore. And we realize this either through the analyzation right now, like in a sermon like this, or the things we idolize, they fail us. They fail us. For example, maybe you realize money, if you worship money, it eventually ran out. You needed more. Or we realize the desire for that one last drink turned into another one last drink, and then another one last one. That luxury item just became old news and you need something new. That acceptance or approval you wanted was ruined when you did one wrong thing. We get to these points where we start to realize certain things have been blown out of proportion and maybe have become bigger than God. There's a story in the Bible, actually, where a few people realize things have been blown out of proportion. And they are at this crossroad when they need to choose to worship God or worship acceptance and an idol. It's actually a really fun story. It's in the book of Daniel. And in the children's ministry today, they're going to be playing with fire because this story actually deals with fire. So you might want to check that out. If you're a kid in this service, come to the next service. Pastor Erica's playing with fire. It's going to be awesome. But check that out in our clubhouse. We do some awesome things in the clubhouse. But we won't be playing with fire up here. So you just get to listen to me. But the story we're talking about is in Daniel 3. And how it starts is you need to know a little context. What's going on in that time is there is this Jewish nation, and this Jewish nation is where our faith comes from. And what happens is this nation gets conquered, actually. Another nation conquers it, and they decide that they want to train a few people from this Jewish nation to become ambassadors, to be known, to learn the ways of this new nation. So they select these 3 people. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Pretty sweet names, right? Like, that'd be awesome. So these 3 guys were selected. And what they're going to do is they're going to be taught in the ways of this new nation. Well, what happens is this king of that time, of this new nation, King Nebuchadnezzar, again, sweet name, right? King Nebuchadnezzar decides, you know what? I'm basically like a god. I want to make a statue. I want to make this idol. So he constructs this idol, something maybe like this. Who knows what it looks like? The scriptures say it either was of himself or of something of his choosing. So it probably was himself, who knows? But he constructs this idol, and what happens is as this idol is constructed, he's like, you know what? Everybody needs to see this. Everybody needs to come. So he calls all the officials, come check this out. And he says, you know what? Like I said, I'm basically a god. You're going to bow down to this. You're going to bow down and worship this idol. So when the instruments sound, everybody must bow down to this idol. Well, what happens is the instruments are about to sound, but then he throws in of this. If you don't bow, the construction workers that were building this, they left the fiery furnace out here. We're just going to toss you in there. So if you don't bow down, we'll toss you in that fiery furnace. So what happens is the instruments sound, everybody bows, but this one guy comes up to the king and says, those 3 Jewish guys are not bowing. They're not bowing. The king looks over and kind of has a good relationship with them, and he's like, I really don't want to throw him in the fiery furnace, so he does one of these. I'm going to give you one more chance, the instruments will sound, and if you don't bow, you're going to go in that fiery furnace, and you know what? We're going to turn it up 7 times hotter than it already was, so make sure you bow. He's kind of cueing them in. The instruments sound, and they still do not bow. They say, our God does not allow us to worship anything else. He doesn't allow us to bow down to other things. Now, this is a really fun story. As things continue, you actually even see they get tossed into this fiery furnace. They get tossed into it, and it says the soldiers that were taking them to this fiery furnace, they actually are burning up inside. Well, they get tossed in this fiery furnace, and they close the door, and there's this window on it, and they happen to see the men totally untouched, unburned. Their clothes are still on them. Nothing's wrong with them. And they actually see 4 people instead of 3. So the king says, call them out, bring them out. Something's going on. And they come out completely untouched, and they said, your God must have protected you. Well, like I said, this is a fun story. You should check it out, read more about it, and read the ending. But for us, though, we see that they are willing to say no to things they've realized they've been worshiping or have had others wanting them to worship. And not without consequences, right? They had to risk something. Imagine, they chose to not worship something even knowing that they're going to be put into this fiery furnace. That's crazy, right? Yet that's the kind of devotion God wants us to think of if we're to follow his first commandments. Jesus actually even talks on this too. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus speaks on this. He says, no one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, Jesus is using this when he's talking about the idol of money. But what Jesus is teaching is, if we're to worship God correctly, we need to make sure we aren't worshiping anything else. So, how do we know if we have another master? I think a good way of thinking about this actually comes from how dogs are, or primarily my dog at least. My dog Willow, she's super cute. She's a really good dog. She's a really good listener. She will do all these fancy tricks for me, and I would say I am her master. But there comes this time, my wife and I, we really like pizza. Anybody else really like pizza? Yeah, I love pizza. Well, we have pizza, and my wife will save the crust for our dog. And it'll be like one of those things like my dog just sits there and waits. She's so excited about this pizza that's coming to her, this crust. She's waiting and waiting and waiting. Well, it gets to a spot where it's time where she gets this crust. And I'll start calling my dog over to me like, come on over here, Willow. Come on over here. She won't even look at me. She is so zoned into that pizza crust. Like, I'll call her. I'll even get up to her ear, and I'll be like, Willow, look at me. She is totally zoned in on that pizza. Now, like I said, I would say I'm my dog's master, but she will completely keep her eyes off of me if there's food present. I am not her master in that moment. I'll even call for her to look at me, like I said, and yeah, there's no way she does. Now, this is funny and all, but I feel we do that to God at times. If you are willing to follow through on worshiping or idolizing something, even with God's ways on your mind or calling for you, like I do my dog, you're probably worshiping it. So you got to stop. You got to decide to not bow to it. And it's not easy. How many times do you feel you have to risk something to stop worshiping it? Thinking it's just going to be so hard to follow through with that. For example, maybe you have this feeling that you just have to do this thing for your child, or otherwise they're going to hate you as a parent, or you have this feeling that you just need to do this thing, or otherwise your brain's going to go insane, or you have this thought that you just have to have one more, otherwise your body's going to shut down, or you need this money, or otherwise your finances will crumble, or you need the success, or otherwise you'll lose their respect, or you need this to do this one thing, or otherwise they won't love you. It's like stopping doing something, knowing your choice will basically get you tossed into your own type of fiery furnace. Now, there's a time in the show, This Is Us, where they deal with something similar to this, trying to stop worshiping things. And it's with the character Kevin. His name is Kevin. He's one of the kids in the show. And he starts to realize, again, he's been worshiping all these things and is wrestling with stopping them. But he's realizing it's really hard. We're going to watch the clip, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Check it out. In this clip, Kevin comes to a spot where he realizes he has been worshiping a lot of things. Approval, success, fame, drugs. And he has realized the worship of these things have left him empty and have actually made his life tougher. Honestly, I feel this is part of why God wants us to have him first, is God gives us direction on almost all of the things that failed Kevin. God doesn't want to make our lives tougher or more painful, so he gives us direction on how to avoid a lot of what he did. Yet if we go back to our story of the fiery furnace, we learn that God has our back. When we choose to stop worshiping things we shouldn't, that he has our back. It's not easy, and to get started, it's hard, but he's there with us. So for us, to get back to worshiping God fully, we need to make sure that we can stop other things that we're doing, or stop worshiping other things, and have God be our one master. Once you do that, you'll experience everything else in a more full, freeing, and truly God-honoring way. In the Bible, we see other people experience this. In Psalm 119:45, it says, "I will walk in freedom, for I have devoted myself to your commandments." What's great about this is when you do this, is you actually start to experience the freedom and benefits of putting God first and everything else second right away. So today, most of us have probably realized we all worship something other than God at times. And we've talked a ton about how we need, or why we need to get back to worshiping him as number one. As we're about wrapping up here, I want to spend my last 2 minutes talking about what you can do to worship God as number one. Again, the definition of worship said to give honor, respect, and adoration to God. For us, when we choose to worship God, there are some obvious ones that we can do. Maybe it's just being here on Sunday for you. Giving God a chance to speak to you and help you grow in your relationship with him, that's showing him respect, of allowing him to speak to you and teach you new things. Maybe it's that morning time that you have. You have 10 minutes in the morning that you just give to God where you pray, you're maybe reading scripture, and that's the time where he just speaks to you, and that's giving him the respect he deserves. Maybe it's something unique to you. For me, I have two in particular that I do. The first one is worship. I really like worship songs. I don't know if you know this, but worship songs are pretty repetitive and like kind of say the same thing over and over and over. Yeah, and I think it's actually purposeful because like a lot of times you'll hear the same thing over and over. And as I start saying that in my head, I'm not just saying it, I'm now saying it to God and worshiping him, saying, I'm forgiven, I'm free, thank you, I admire you, or whatever the lyrics may be. But you're now singing it to God and not just saying words. So that's me. And the second thing I do that's worship is through nature. When I'm out in nature and I see all the different things or all the colors. My wife and I recently went to Alaska and we saw like all these greens. I don't know if you heard Pastor Mike say one time in a sermon, he's like, there's like 1 billion greens out there. Well, we kept saying that to each other, like, there's 1 billion greens out here. I'm like, thanks, Pastor Mike. Like, I thought I'm here with my wife. No. but we were just admiring how many greens there were. How many colors and the nature and the complexity of it. It was just amazing. And to say, God, you're amazing. That was worship. Again, for you, maybe it's being here at church. Maybe it's worship music like me. Maybe it's in nature. Maybe it's just being alone. I've heard from hunters that time alone is worship for them. Maybe it's in prayer for you. Maybe it's with your finances of worshiping God with the money you've earned. Maybe it's your time or through serving God, which is by serving others. Maybe it's through being thankful. As part of us at RCC, one of our everybody's is we want everyone to worship God as number one. So this week, I want to challenge you to do 3 things. The first is this. First, see if you are worshiping something other than God. Think about your life for 5 minutes and see if there are areas where you would choose your desires before God's. Secondly, of those things you stumble across, stop bowing down to the things before God. That may start with you just saying no one time to it in the week, one time during the day. Maybe it's you can stop completely cold turkey on something, but figure out that process of stopping worshiping things before God. Third and lastly, worship God in the way that you feel is the most God-honoring way for you personally. I'm going to pray that God helps me stay away from worshiping other things before him and helps me see the reason he is the one who deserves my worship first. If you want that too, you can pray along with me. Hey God, thank you for having our back. At times when we get sucked into worshiping other things, we know that you're there with us and you'll have our back and help us get back on track of worshiping you as number one. Help us do that this week and stay committed to you with that.